Hello! In this episode of my prediction series, I'll be talking about the Democratic primaries being held on May 17th in the states of Kentucky and Oregon. So, my prediction is that Hillary Clinton wins the Kentucky primary and Bernie Sanders gets second there. And my prediction is that Bernie Sanders wins the Oregon primary and Hillary Clinton gets second there. And so, here's the reasons for my predictions. The first reason, and I'll talk about Kentucky first, is that Kentucky is, if you look at a map, is situated geographically in a region where a lot of states have voted for Hillary Clinton in pretty decent numbers. And I see no reason, looking at their demographics and the history of electoral politics in the state of Kentucky, why Sanders would win in Kentucky over Clinton. I think Clinton is a much more better known entity in Southern politics. And I also think that Clinton has given her role now as sort of the front runner for so long, definitely cemented her name recognition in that region of the country for sure. And I just don't see Sanders doing as well in Kentucky as he'll be doing in Oregon, is my prediction. So I think that my second reason for Kentucky that I think Clinton will be winning there is that it is a closed primary. Sanders has not been doing very well in those closed primaries. When it's only Democratic voters and a Democratic electorate and independents can't really participate, turns out that within the Democratic base and the electorate, Hillary Clinton has received a whole lot of votes in those closed primaries, and Sanders hasn't received as many because he hasn't been a Democrat that long, and he hasn't built up that political name recognition and capital within the Democratic primary and those connections compared to Hillary Clinton over the years. She's got all sorts of endorsements from all sorts of very powerful and influential people. She is the establishment candidate, and it shows in how she's done thus far. And so I think Hillary Clinton will win the Kentucky primary, and Sanders, I think, will be second there. Now, Oregon's a different story. Oregon's got some very progressive politics compared to the rest of the country. This is the state, after all, that has instituted things like a higher minimum wage than a lot of the other states. They have they passed a law that essentially signs up everyone who's eligible to vote once they turn 18 for absentee voting. Democratic participation in the state of Oregon is super duper high because of the voter registration law. And that makes a difference when turnout's super duper high, considering that there's an automatic voter registration. It's sort of an opt-out rather than an opt-in for voter registration. I mean, not even. It's an automatic voter registration. If you're eligible to vote, then they will send you a ballot and you can vote, or choose not to vote if you decide not to vote. That's sort of what I mean by opt-out, is because Oregon has a absentee ballot option. So, anyways, my point for Oregon as to why I think Sanders will do well in the state of Oregon is that Oregon's politics are super similar to Washington state politics. It's a very progressive state. It's got a fairly democratic base on the Democratic side, a fairly progressive base, rather liberal base on the Democratic side. And even though it's a closed primary, I think that Sanders has done quite well on the coastal states, Alaska, Hawaii, Washington, and I think he'll do well in Oregon. I don't think that Clinton will do as well in the state of Oregon as Sanders. And Sanders had one of his most famous moments of the entire campaign season in Oregon with the Bernie Sanders phenomenon. When Sanders was giving a speech in Portland, Oregon, and a bird showed up. It was pretty fascinating way back in March when Sanders was chatting away in his rally, and a bird hopped up onto his podium. And Sanders talked about the bird, and the bird flew away. But it was one of those things that was sort of amazing and fantastic. But those kinds of things, that magic that happens in a campaign season, that's a big deal in terms of generating enthusiasm, generating support, and just being generally awesome. And so I think that in terms of generating more enthusiasm, I think there's a lot more enthusiasm in Oregon than, say, Kentucky for Bernie Sanders. And so my prediction is Clinton wins in Kentucky, but I think Sanders wins in Oregon, and I think he wins by at least 10% more than, well, probably not 10%, maybe 5% more than whatever Clinton ends up getting in Oregon. And yeah, it's going to be super interesting. The demographics in both of those states actually work in large margin to Sanders' favor if there's a high turnout. I think there will be a much higher turnout percentage-wise of the voting populace eligible within the closed primary voting in Oregon compared to in the state of Kentucky. And it has very much to do with the automatic registration thing that's going on in Oregon compared to in Kentucky. It is a thing that has an impact on voter turnout. And so I think that Sanders will do quite well in Oregon. But Kentucky, I think, is quite competitive. And it does look like Clinton is actually doing some campaigning and doing an ad buy in Kentucky, because I think she is keeping an eye on the general election as well. That she wants to make sure she can have a voice and an impact in Kentucky in the general if she happens to be the nominee, which it's looking like she will be for the Democratic Party in 2016. At the end of the night, because of apportionment of delegates and how many delegates are at stake, I think that Sanders might actually pull ahead with maybe 5 or 10 more delegates than Clinton, because I don't think that Clinton winning Kentucky is going to be a huge win. I think it's going to be very close, probably within 4 to 5 percentage points of each other. I think Sanders will win bigger in Oregon. So I think overall that Sanders will gain a net positive on delegates, but there's just not that many delegates left at stake, and so it's still very much an uphill battle. But in terms of his role in democracy, in the contest, in terms of contributing to the marketplace ideas, it's awesome that Bernie Sanders is still in the race, is still, talking the good talk. He throws these pretty amazing rallies talking about things like poverty and things that are really, really, really focused on issues that affect a lot of people. And he throws, they're an hour and a half long, if more. They've got panels of speakers, and it's super fun to watch and listen to because of the impact that it has on the overall conversation. And I think it's also amazing that given where the election season started, with Bernie Sanders way behind in both money and name recognition and a bunch of other things, where the elections panned out. And for a candidate who spent a substantial amount of his political career talking about issues like income inequality, poverty, infrastructure, making healthcare more accessible and cheaper for a lot of people, I think it's pretty amazing how he's managed to transform his voice to a much larger platform. It was very amazing how he even got on a somewhat global platform with the Vatican visit. That's amazing for a primary candidate, especially one who's so far behind Hillary Clinton. So far behind in a nominating contest. Pretty incredible as a moral voice in the world. So that's an aside. My predictions are Hillary Clinton wins Kentucky, Sanders gets second there, Sanders wins Oregon, Hillary Clinton gets second there. It will be very fascinating to see what the results are. I definitely like to follow politics, if that's not clear at this point. And so I definitely want to figure out if my predictions are wrong for either Kentucky or Oregon, why. And I think for Oregon, it might be possible Clinton wins, if only because it's a closed primary. But I think that it's counterbalanced in Sanders' favor because of that huge turnout, because of the automatic registration thing going on in Oregon for eligible voters. In Kentucky, it's possible Sanders wins in Kentucky. The demographics there do somewhat favor him. They're similar to West Virginia in the sense that and Michigan in the sense that a lot of cars are made in Kentucky. There's a pretty sizable history of coal as an industry in Kentucky, and so if either of those demographics turn out in much larger numbers for Sanders, that could change the outcome in terms of who wins. But my prediction still stands that right now I think Hillary Clinton has a much greater advantage in Kentucky than she does in Oregon due to name recognition and geographical location of the state, and the history of the Kentucky politics works in Clinton's favor. And so it'll be super interesting. May 17th. It's not that far away. It's less than a week away. All right. Well, thank you for watching, and I will be paying attention to who wins, and if my prediction's wrong, I'll be figuring it out. I'll be reading those numbers to figure out what's going on, because it is fun to learn. Learning is important. All right.